Sharing live stream. Okay, I think we're here. I'm going to get rid of that so it doesn't distract me. Mute this. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 14th Annual Buffalo International Film Festival and our panel on distribution. We have a rock star panel here today joining us. We have collaborative distributor Brian Glick. They are film sales agents focusing on prestige films for underserved communities. They lead the documentary and acquisitions for the newly launched Armada Entertainment, and their lineup includes hits like Dream Girl, The Last Out, which is playing at BIFF, Tahara, also playing at BIFF, and Keyboard Fantasies. They previously spent 5.5 years as the director of acquisitions and theatrical releasing for the Film Collaborative, where they had a lot of Independent Spirit Awards and have been featured at many film festivals speakers, including Sundance, South by Southwest, Hot Docs, and now the Buffalo International Film Festival. We also have another partner of our festival, Dr. Rebecca Louise Smith. She was born in Worcestershire, United Kingdom, and began her career as a personal assistant and worked for 10 years, achieving degrees in academia. And she is now, her and her team are the folks behind the Festival Doctor. They create success and nourish filmmakers, helping them secure festival runs, win awards, and receive recognition within the film industry. And then we have Nick Algoni. He is an agent in the film finance and sales group at the entertainment agent and sports agency CAA, Creative Artist Agency. He's based in LA, but he was born and raised in Western New York and has been a friend of the festival. Films he's represented include What We Do in the Shadows, Search, Gaga, 5'2", The Guest, and 2 BIFF films last year, Buffaloed and Crowned Vic. So welcome to the panel, everyone. Thanks for making time to speak with us.
Hi, thank you, John. Nice
for having us.
Thank you. My first question is, can you explain your jobs in the past and at what point do you get involved with a film that you take on?
Shall I start? Shall I give it a go? Okay, Thank you, John. My name's Rebecca and my company is the Film Festival Doctor. So I've been running this company now for almost 10 years and we tend to get on board around development stage, but also when the film is completed. It depends on how far ahead the filmmakers have planned ahead. But what we do is we help our clients create successful film festival campaigns for their films, both shorts and features, fiction, non-fiction. Sometimes they do screenplays, depending on how strong they are. But our goal for the filmmaker is to get the film seen on the festival circuit far and wide as possible to help them achieve their goals. And we've had many films. We've got 2 films here at BIFF, which is doing really well. We're excited, Marcus and Proxy. One great short, one great feature. But our goal is to certainly make sure we get the best exposure for the filmmaker. And we've had several films that have been Oscar shortlisted, 1 Oscar nomination, and several BAFTA shortlisted films as well.
Great, thank you. Brian, I'll kick it over to you.
Sure. So at least for me, generally speaking, it's once the film has a solid rough cut and is starting the festival process. So we're primarily looking at finished or close to finished content versus packaging. We're doing festival focused film sales and distribution, so really pushing films onto the film festival circuit to kind of build their brand and their worth. And without seeing what the cut is, it's very hard to guide that process early on. But there are exceptions, and we certainly do stock titles of interest. The Last Out, which is screening at your festival, I stalked them, just to be blunt. I knew as soon as I had a meeting when the movie was in production that I was hyper interested in it. And I think I watched maybe 5 or 6 different cuts. And I don't even like baseball, and it's a movie about baseball. But I knew that it was something special. And so attached before they were even really starting the festival submission process with them.
Great. And Nick, can you explain a little bit about how you get involved in a film's life?
Sure. So I work at Creative Artist Agency. I'm an agent there. I work in the media finance group. And our job is really to sort of act as producers within the agency, using the leverage of our clients to package, find financing, and distribution for independent films. I think that interestingly enough, in this sort of COVID world, the studios have sort of dried up, and a lot of traditional ways to finance have sort of gone, the windows have been thrown out, the rules have been sort of thrown out the window. So it's been a really interesting time. I look for projects really at any stage, frankly, but generally it's stuff that is as packaged along as possible, meaning that you have a script and you have some elements attached, whether that's a director or a producer or talent. Sometimes, many times, I'll also watch finished films like Brian and help secure distribution for films, take them to Sundance or Toronto or Cannes and help sell the US. And many times, sometimes, I help find scripts development money, but generally speaking, it's scripts that are a little bit further along in their packaging or finished films.
Great. And all three of you have been awesome partners to work with at the Buffalo International Film Festival, and I thank you for your support. I'm wondering, though, specifically, and because we have you do three different things, what do you look for in projects that you take on?
Okay, so in terms of, for me and my company and with our clients, for me, I'm looking for films which are what we tend to call the festival films. So I'm not looking, obviously I'm not a sales agent, so I'm not looking for films that are particularly commercial, formulaic, or by the numbers. What we look for are really edgy filmmakers who have films where they take a risk, they're ambitious, they're daring, they're outside the norm, and films which are very obviously as original as possible. Sometimes we take films on that have got a great concept, and there might be one or two things that maybe aren't flawless, but it shows there is an authorial, strong vision that has the potential to go far in terms of, Oscar level qualifying film festivals, BAFTA qualifying film festivals. A lot of times we do have films when we work with feature films that are what I call like the hybrid, like mainstream, but also festival film. So they're films that can actually sell, but are actually our festival favorites too. One film was called Canary, which was a LGBTQI feature film from South Africa, which is phenomenal. And that is a fantastic piece of work that did all the key LGBTQI festivals, even some festivals that weren't in that niche, like the Costa Rica Film Festival, Durban Film Festival, ones that were more general. And it is on the circuit, we helped to get a sales agent who is now sold by Breaking Glass, who I think have sold it to a lot of territories on their model. So that's a film that by no means is, mainstream, but has got that kind of sellable aspect to it, whilst also being a fantastic LGBTQI piece.
So you would say that you work from like the ground up in helping the filmmaker and the producers strategize and then find the sales agent who can then take it to the next step.
That's right. So I'm glad that we have two fantastic panelists here so I can connect with them. So yes, so what we do is we're the one that get them on the circuit, build their presence and get the right exposure, and that then will attract a sales agent. I have found actually that sometimes some sales agents like to come on board before the festival. So when we take on a film, we tend to now reach out to our sales agent contacts and say that we've got this really strong feature that probably could be your cup of tea. So do you want to look at it now before we do festivals and join us? Some of them are like that, but some of them aren't. Everyone seems to be very different. So yes, so it's very important they do have festivals if they have no stars in, for example, or just are a film that would need to get that exposure because it might not be a theatrical piece to get distributed in cinemas and theatres when it gets an agent.
Great. And Brian, I think of you as someone who does it all. You get involved, I think it sounds like at the very early stages in terms of a rough cut. I guess Nick maybe a little bit sooner in terms of financing and packaging at a script level. Can you talk a little bit about what attracts you to certain films and, that you have, I think, 3 here this year, right?
And 3 that I think speak branding wise in terms of what I'm looking for. As I tell people that the truth with film festivals is if the 100 best films were all about people suffering COVID in isolation, you're not going to program 100 films about COVID for your festival, which I'm terrified is what 2022 is going to look like. So I'm looking for films that have specific demographic elements. LGBTQIA plus, Pan-African, Latin, human rights, environmental, where there are these niche circuits, but also where as the general film festival, you're going to want to program films that represent these demographics. And what's important for me is that it be ideally by the community, for the community. So, the studios are much more likely to whitewash. The studios are much more likely to straight wash and cis wash. And I don't want that type of thing in my slate. And then ideally it's good. I think we can't push that enough. My average release for this year is 95.5% on Rotten Tomatoes. If we're going to put a film out there in the marketplace right now, and especially if we're going to put it through the festival circuit, if it's not either going to get very kind reviews or be the type of genre film that's built on divisiveness, then in fact, continuing through the festival run could hurt the film. To pick a contemporary example, Good Joe Bell got some of the worst reviews of any movie in the Toronto Film Festival, and it got the highest sales distribution deal of any film in the Toronto Film Festival. It's no accident the film has immediately been pulled from the circuit, because its reviews are only going to get worse as the process goes on, but it's being positioned as a wide release tentpole, not something as a non-binary queer agnostic Jew I'm particularly interested in.
I couldn't agree more. Not to harp on Good Joe Bell, but Nick, can you talk a little bit about what you look for in a project? Particularly, I guess you're looking at more commercial projects and things that could sell to different territories and different markets early in the process, and I guess packaging the financing for that.
Sure. I think I'm also a little spoiled because I can also look internally too and find projects that are generated by clients. So I'm at a really good crossroads of being able to identify projects internally, filmmakers that I think I would like to work with, and try and figure out ways to do that. But if it's external, I think because it's such a big world out there and there's so many great people like here in this panel that are finding such great material, I tend to focus on genre projects because I find that, especially now in COVID, those are the most malleable in terms of figuring out ways to get financed and distributed. If you go any other genre, it can be very tough. Dramas, comedies can be very regional and local. And I find that sort of the genre space can let a director really exercise their craft freely and not be worried about finding like this puzzle piece of this actor that equals this amount of money and, sort of putting it together that way. So I specifically, I'm out there looking at as many filmmakers as possible that are specific in sci-fi, horror, thriller, action. And if they can make it, in a budget and be able to scale up, meaning that if we were able to give them more materials, more resources, they can scale up and look better. That's the type of filmmakers I'm looking for. So constantly looking at film festivals like, the Toronto Midnight, Sitges, South by Southwest, Sundance, filmmakers coming out of there, looking for short filmmakers, anyone who has the technicality and craft, but also knows how to tell a story, which is very important because you find there's a lot of people who know how to technically shoot, but still are having, still struggle with story. So yeah, it's a wide range of people that I draw from, but that's just some insight.
I want to jump the gun and just ask you this question. Anybody else can also chime in too, Nick, I'm curious because obviously theatrical is in a little bit of a crisis right now. We don't know when theaters in North America particularly are going to open. There's a couple of European festivals, Venice, that were able to do in-person screenings. Toronto largely was virtual for folks that weren't in the immediate Greater Toronto area. And I'm wondering, what does this opportunity and the films that you're championing at CAA, is there opportunities for theatrical since the studio output is really, there's really nothing right now, at least for the next couple months. So is there a chance for festival films to find, I think Gravitas is a movie that's on a couple hundred screens right now, which is unusual. Normally they do a hybrid VOD and maybe a few theaters in New York and LA.
Yeah, I could talk about this for an entire day. It's astounding how much the business has changed. Now, the question is are independent films in a better spot than they were? The answer is no, because with theaters being gone, that is a vital way for independent films to find their way in America, whether it's through critical reviews or whatever. So having that not be a part of the ecosystem is detrimental to all. But what I would say is you're finding these really interesting case studies, like a movie we sold called The Wretched to IFC, which was a very good genre film, which about basically an updated tale about a witch. And that went on to make a couple $1 million at the drive-in. And so you've had these phenomenons of these independent movies. Another one was Kevin James in this movie, Becky. And there's another few that you're seeing some of these movies that, you know, are having these opportunities to go play theaters that never would have had the opportunity before. But, you know, the business and the theatrical business is still, when the US box office is only grossing $5 to $10 million in a weekend, it probably even less. I don't know what the gross numbers are. It's bad. It's not good for anyone. And generally you would have the you know, all boats would rise in this sort of situation. But what I am finding is that, you know, there really are really hard questions that are being asked of the exhibitors, and you're finding that the streamers are now ruling the roost. But also there's been the rise of companies that generally were considered sort of not as given as much respect as they used to be. These are the IFCs, Magnolias, you know, E1, Gravitas, Saban, you know, you name it, we could go down a whole list, but they, you know, Vertical, all these companies, they're finding a huge renaissance on VOD and making a lot of money there. So, so I think, and also just to finish my thought, the issue with all boats not rising with theatrical is that now the market, in my opinion, has become very boom or bust. So like Brian pointed out, you see this big Good Joe Bell deal go, right? And that's a huge deal, millions of dollars, but then every independent film that doesn't have names and actors are struggling, right? So it's like you either get it and you hit it big with Netflix or a studio and you make a lot of money, and those are generally more cast-driven movies, or you are really struggling now, because how do you get somebody on iTunes to recognize and buy your movie when you don't have a movie star? When you're trying to build word of mouth and you're trying to get the word out there, usually film festivals, in-person film festivals and theatrical were able to spread the word that way. And without that gone, you're finding, I think, a much tougher way for these filmmakers to rise to the top.
Great. And my question, though, too, is anybody want to add anything to that question about this period of uncertainty in theatrical?
I think
Brian,
it falls under filmmakers. You know, what's so great, there's not a lot of positives in our COVID environment, but one of them is you can now release a movie on a virtual theatrical for almost nothing. And the audience that's going to come to that is the audience that you bring to it. So I think of it as an almost free version of Fathom events, if you will. Mm-hmm. And there have been a number of documentaries that have done this as they haven't gotten the distribution deal that they were anticipating or hoping for, in part because of COVID. And it's a battle that we've been having with some of our filmmakers, because the old school thought is you don't want to, you know, necessarily create and define your social media brand before you bring on your distributor, who might want to do it in a particular way. But our films that have come in with a built-in social media presence have a distinct advantage in the COVID time. And what it means now is you have niche movies that can get a New York Times review, that can essentially release in New York City for pennies. Whereas before, for me to open a movie theatrically in New York, you know, just that 1 week in New York could be running $15,000, $25,000, which means it's an automatic loss if you look at the per screen averages, versus it's free for a, you know, Film Society of Lincoln Center to put a movie on their website. They don't have the same capital obligations they once did. You don't have to take out a New York Times ad anymore. But genre movies, horror films, right? They're particularly adept for this environment. Comedies, escapist entertainment is great. But what I will warn people is, you don't know what you don't know. We have an amazing genre film called La Dosis. We picked it up out of Rotterdam. And the first 7 minutes of the film is a woman dying on a ventilator. It played really, really well in January. by March, it didn't have quite the same lighthearted horror approach for the first 7 minutes. And we actually lost our original US premiere because they said it was too disturbing for their audience.
Oh, that is very interesting. And the other question I have too, because we did touch upon this, is that hybrid model in which you take a film out, you're splitting the revenue with a local art house. That's one of the things that I always wonder too. If you're, if your film site at Lincoln Center and you could rent it from Film Forum down the street, who do you rent it from, or North Park Theater in Buffalo? And I'm wondering if it has proved to be a valuable revenue source for distributors. And could you see a situation where maybe a film opens, one weekend and then it moves to the virtual cinema platform instead?
I mean, we have done like a virtual platform release. We're doing it right now with Healing from Hate, where we started in one screen and we've been slowly expanding across the country as though it was a regular theatrical release. And it's really based on the cinemas themselves and the filmmakers. So it's a question of, have you built your brand in each of those areas? So the cinemas that have, great email lists, great social media management, they can drive in much stronger revenue. But the weird thing when I look at our eventive virtual theatricals is seeing the geographic distribution of people. But that doesn't tell me where they were from. It only tells me the IP address from where they purchased. And people may be isolating in different areas. But there is some sort of name association. Even when we have 50 or 60 screens, disproportionately people will still gravitate towards New York or LA, regardless of where they're based. They will purchase the Lemley link, they will purchase the Film Society link. And I think some of that might just have to be with press. The New York Times is still the most valuable review you can get. And if they're going to say playing at Film Society of Lincoln Center or Film Forum, that's where people are going to first see it and go to it. And that's, of course, what we're going to promote on social media.
I think Mason Wells had a tweet where he said from Kino Lorber, saying that people will, even in Brooklyn, they'll ask when it's going to open in Brooklyn, even instead of renting it from the same theater in Manhattan. Nick, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this. Since your model, you mentioned The Wretched, that was actually the first film I ever saw at a drive-in in my life, weirdly enough. I had to go to the movies in the middle of all of this. So how has this model changed for you, and is that going to be a relevant model going forward, the drive-in, for those kind of vertical entertainment films where you do have some stars and some well-known actors and that kind of, the IFC and the verticals, those films they tend to pick up for the hybrid VOD and theatrical?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a function of what happens with COVID, which I think nobody knows, but certainly the way things are going, the drive-in seems to be the premier place to see movie entertainment besides your TV. Look, I think that many companies that are not the studios and streamers are very resilient and are survivors. So wherever they're going to find ways to monetize money and get business going, they're going to do that. I do think the current model is not really sustainable, frankly, because there's just too many films that are still being made, even or trying to get made, that won't have enough paths to distribute, to monetize, and Netflix is not going to buy every single one. I think the biggest conception problem with Netflix and places like that is that they're buying so much that they must be buying your film, when in reality they really don't want independent film anymore. They want big, star-studded, glossy movies, like Extraction or whatever, or Adam Sandler movies. So I think that there has to be a way for this to survive, for the American independent market and independent filmmaking to continue. But it really is just a function of where COVID goes, and I think that anything is possible in the future. I mean, like, if you can't go to a music concert soon, maybe drive-ins is a solution, or maybe people will just start having holograms and beam a concert into your living room for that. Like, wherever there's a will, there's a way. But where we are right now is not sustainable, and it needs to change. And I do worry about places like Sundance and having them be still legitimate sort of purveyors of good taste, when you can't physically go and meet people. It really is tough to sort of be told, you know, here's all these films, watch them, and not have that interaction. We're all social people. The movie going is a social experience. So having a film festival where you have that social experience, or the theater, and then not being able to do it is very challenging. So it's a good question. I think it's a great, it's promising that a movie like The Wretched can break through and have its moment, which would have never happened in the normal ecosystem. But we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot of movies that need to come out that haven't been out for a year, and they're going to just flood the market at some point. So
the big titles they've been holding off on if they haven't put them on Disney Plus. Rebecca, you were.
Yeah, both what you said was incredible. And in the UK, because I'm currently in the UK right now until I make my move to the States, but we don't have drive-ins here. So there has been a very dramatic amount of cinemas, theatres shutting down in the UK because of this. And Cineworld, which has a partner in the US, look on what the name of it is now, but Cineworld.
Regal Cinemas is there.
Regal Cinemas, that's it. Yeah. So Cineworld has temporarily shut down all of everything around the UK until the big releases come in to get revenue back. So it's worth opening up and putting all the staff in, etc. So we haven't got, the only alternative has been obviously VOD, and there has been in the reports in UK a huge increase in subscriptions to Netflix in the UK. There's nothing else we can do. There's no drive-in to go to. I'm interested too about drive-ins. I want to go to one when I get to the States. It sounds so exciting, drive in the car. But I'm intrigued to see what kind of genres will be able to work at a drive-in. So I'm not really sure in terms of festival context if one of my 3-hour subtitled films can actually work in a drive-in, or is it just a particular genre? Is it like horror's the best, short film's the best? That's something that's new to me, but something to explore. Obviously, as you say, depending on how long COVID goes on for and how long we need to drive in. So I'm intrigued to see what that will happen next.
I think it's really telling that the new Frederick Wiseman film, a 4.5-hour documentary about Boston City Hall, excellent. I watched it partially at the gym on my phone during TIFF, is not going to have any theatrical run in North America. I don't know if it played in Venice in a physical theater, but it's definitely not one you'd want to do in a drive-in for 4.5 hours. But I am curious though, in this, we touched upon this with Sundance and their announcement that they are going to have virtual and some regional events as well, broadening that. I think London Film Festival right now is kind of doing the same thing where they have some regional events as well as virtual. And will film festivals and will markets, Cannes was also virtual this year as well. Are they going to be relevant, or is there going to be something else that comes in and takes that place? I mean, we mentioned for reviews, but what are your thoughts on that this year? We're seeing that kind of radically break down.
I think it changes. I think it changes in terms of what festivals become more valuable. And again, it's based on the infrastructure that they've put out. And at the risk of shooting myself in the foot here, you had South by Southwest and Tribeca, which both essentially canceled their festivals under, tight circumstances. And South by Southwest went out of their way, bent over backwards to try and create some sort of opportunity for their filmmakers. Do I think the Amazon thing was a great idea and work well? Absolutely not. Would I have let my films play on the Amazon arrangement they had? Absolutely not. But Tribeca did less than nothing. They took the cash prizes that were allotted to filmmakers, over $160,000, and they voided them. They got rid of the Tribeca Film Institute and the funding resource for filmmakers. And then the kicker was, on top of canceling this film festival essentially and just having a few industry access options, they decided they were going to do a global free event, partnering with all of these other festivals as sort of, we are the world kumbaya. Well, if you're a filmmaker and you have a choice, I would be more inclined to pick South by Southwest just based upon their COVID actions. And by that same token, right, what are the festivals that are utilizing the hybrid model to their advantage? I think Fantasia and TIFF are two Canadian film festivals that are great examples of moving forward. And we had 2 films in Fantasia. We left with 100% Rotten Tomato scores for both of them. and both had premiered at A-list festivals this year and gotten almost no reviews. So like, hey, you're doing more for us. They facilitated meetings, they built connections. But the challenge for next year is most of these festivals will have to shrink their lineups. And so I think you're going to see very few discovery titles next year. They're almost every film you see is going to have a predefined relationship with the festival they're launching at.
It's very interesting. Nick, I'm wondering if you could speak to the market side of this, because Cannes, their market went virtual this year. TIFF also, there was actually some sales. There were some multi-million-dollar deals that happened out of those markets. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes, sure. It's been a wild ride. So basically, speaking macro, you had the studios basically shut down, right? And they're like, holy crap, James Bond, all our Marvel movies, we got to push. So, what they've been stuck in is this limbo of not being able to date their films. And what the streamers have done is, basically they had made enough movies and TV episodes, whatever, that basically they were like stocked for the winter. So they had no need to actually buy anything if they didn't want to. And what they did is that they leveraged the studios to acquire more content directly from the studios. So if you saw, the Tom Hanks movie, the Greyhound that was on Apple, that was actually originally a Sony movie that was going to be released for awards campaigns, and then they just flipped the studios. You'll see with Aaron Sorkin's movie coming up on Netflix, that originally was a Paramount movie, that got flipped as well. Same with Borat, the Sacha Baron Cohen Borat 2, that was going to be a big universal-wide release. Now it's going to be on Amazon. So what you had was this incredible transition of power from the studios to the streamers. And I think everybody in town wanted to have Netflix and Hulu buy their movies. If you look at what they bought, they only bought things for 50, 60, 70, 80 million dollars, and they were only movie star movies that would have been a huge studio movie wide release in the previous years. But what you had was an immediate shift from the studios having control to now the streamers, who are really the only game in town. And you're finding that even the studios today, we're talking Paramount, Warner Brothers, Sony, Universal, Lionsgate, STX, I probably missed out somebody there. They're paralyzed, and they're not picking up movies the way they used to, especially finished films. And so that's left a massive gap in the market, where basically the middle class has been removed from the market, and you are left with major high-end, let's just say $50 to $100 million movies that only the streamers are going to buy because the only thing they can afford. And then you've got everything else in the middle that's suffering, and then you've got true indie films that Brian is all and working on, where that's a little bit more of a sort of a festival run and picking momentum, but doesn't have major movie stars. And so the market is, like I said, boom or bust. It's like you are either hitting it big or you're really challenged to find a buyer. And the buyers, the people that are picking up the most movies are your IFCs, Magnolias, and all. And they still are picking up movies, but they're not thinking about it like they used to, right? Magnolia could go and release Ruth Bader Ginsburg RBG and do a theatrical release to get to $15 million box office. And then Magnolia was in a good position. But now with theatrical removed, even IFC and Magnolias, they can't rely on theaters to get their, or festivals to get the word out. So they're just buying stuff that are programmers, right? This action movie with Ethan Hawke holding a gun, or this comedy with Cecily Strong from Saturday Night Live. It's like very specific things, because what they're thinking is like, okay, you're not going to hear about this in the local theater or hear about this from your filmmaker friend. You're going on iTunes, you're seeing what's new, and you're saying, I'm going to pick this because I think I know what this is. This is Bruce Willis with a gun, or this is a horror movie from Sam Raimi. Like, what that is, you're going to buy it. And taking chances and discovery, like Brian said, the discovery factor has sort of been removed. And so that's changed the business. People want easy, straight down the middle content that they know what they're buying. And unfortunately, that's where we are, because it's either streaming or transactional where you're going to find content.
Gotcha. I'm wondering though, what's going on the finance side of things? Are these projects and scripts being bought? Or is basically there a backlog of people waiting to go back to work? I know there's been some areas where production has restarted.
Yes. So quickly, and I'll let everyone else respond. It's much tougher, right? Because you don't have traditional ways to get your movie out, right? How do you get your movie out? Right now, it's like I write a check and then I pray Netflix, I can flip it to Netflix for double the price, which isn't a good investment strategy if you're trying to lure somebody in to give you money. So it is tougher. There is a lot more development going on. I think also there are people just who need to make movies for $1 million or under. Like that's just what you have to do now, because if you don't have good outs, then you just got to make it as lean and mean as possible and hope for the best. So you're seeing a lot of filmmakers that are doing films for as low budget as possible and just running with it, like just saying, I need $3 million and go for it. So financing has been challenging for sure. I think it will continue to remain challenging also just because of the world events. Typical financiers are high net individuals and their money's a little bit tight now, so that can be challenging. But I think what people are doing instead are figuring out different ways. Maybe you go to Canada, you get a tax credit, shoot in Canada, or you bring in an Australian, co-production and figure out good ways to do it. Or you shoot, there's this movie with Jerry Butler and Joe Carnahan directing in Atlanta called Cop Shop. It is an action movie. They're getting a Georgia State credit. They found some money and so there are ways to do it. You just have to think outside the box now. And it's just getting squeezed a lot more than it ever was.
Thank you. Brian, can you talk a little bit about that on the documentary end? Obviously, there has been some, I think, rescue funds for documentary films, and there's been a couple of things that I've seen out there. But in terms of where you are in that process for shepherding those projects from to maybe a fine cut all the way out.
I think it's actually easier right now for documentaries that are starting from scratch, like they're in the very beginning of the process, because they can build this into their storyline very easily. And what you're seeing, especially, a lot of documentaries by nature are multinational in scope. So they're having a unit director or co-directors. So there'll be a director and a mini crew in Germany and a director and a mini crew in the United States and in New Zealand. And they're taking that sort of co-production idea quite literally to also get their access to money. Where it's really messy are the films that were in production and on the verge of finishing as COVID hit, and they're missing key pieces of their story that they want to tell. And ideally, they want to find a way to do it without it making feel like, and COVID interrupted everything. And here we are. And to use like the TV example, the We're Here, where the drag queens travel across the United States to rural conservative towns. COVID hit, they weren't able to finish their last episode, and they just did a makeshift Here We Are because of COVID, and it made no sense, and it wasn't very audience accessible. But documentary filmmakers I would argue, are the most adaptable, because they don't start most of the time with a concrete script. They start with, a hypothesis and try to prove the hypothesis, or just see how the story ultimately comes about, which means they have to be flexible. They know that, what's meant to be 1 year could be 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And a lot of their shoots can be done in a low cost manner. Probably the biggest change is the incorporation of animation. And I would say when I met with filmmakers at IFP, maybe 30% of the doc filmmakers were saying they were going to use animation to bridge the gap for things that they could not cover from COVID. But I think it's going to be a long-term challenge for them. And I think most documentaries that utilize COVID in some form are going to be unreleasable. So when I'm looking for 2021, 2022 content, unless you're doing something like 76 Days, which premiered at BIFF, where it's like they were on the ground in Wuhan, they had a level of access and a point of view that none of us could get. I don't want 30 minutes of you stuck with your parents and struggling with your spouse, even if that is part of your journey, because I think it's too close to home for us. And we don't think of documentaries as escapist, but generally we don't want to be literally immersed in the tragedy or the trauma ourselves.
It's an excellent point. Rebecca, I'm wondering if we talk about, that in terms of your client base and what's coming down the pike, if you're seeing any disruptions, you're worried about that, or the kinds of films that you tend to champion, will they survive? Will there be a supply of content next year and the year after that for BIFF, for example?
I'm going to say yes, because when the pandemic kicked off, which by the way, I just made the last flight back from the US to the UK on the last plane, so that was something else. That was a journey and a half. But when I got back, I had a slight worry that I wouldn't have any films to work on, there would be no new content to work on. But actually, a lot of filmmakers went back to their editing suite and polished off the films that were on the back burner. And a lot of filmmakers somehow managed to make films during lockdown by obviously doing not films about COVID, but working around lockdown rules. And then when the lockdown restrictions lifted here, a lot of films then began to get into production, but obviously in a different way to what they would normally film them. So I feel that there will be a lot of content. I think there'll be a lot of short films. There's always a short film available no matter what's happening in the world, but I think it's going to be more shorts, maybe made during COVID, but not always talking about COVID, like COVID narratives. I know that a lot of festivals have introduced now a program to submit your films to, which are just all about COVID-19, about the pandemic. The Corona Diaries, one of them calls it. So there's going to be some of those. They might not be that great, but some of them are very creative. I think there'll be a lot more content of independent films. I don't know how much content there'll be with like mainstream and studio productions, because obviously there's a massive hiatus. But in terms of independent films, I'm seeing more films being made quite quickly because they managed to get them done quicker and getting access to finance. So I think there's going to be no drought in terms of independent scene. And I've had a lot more new films come in to work on. As I mentioned, a lot of filmmakers were looking through their archives and like actually getting down and finishing a film and not being distracted by corporate shoots or doing other things. And I think actually the hybrid model of the hybrid film festival model, I think is really, really valuable. And I think a lot of festivals are going to continue that model when we do get back to our normal that we're used to, back to the real normal. For example, at TIFF, they were just brilliant doing the hybrid model and it worked really well. And a lot of festivals have said who've used that in the UK and other ones around the world have really liked the fact that when they do their industry program online, they access like the whole world and they make more connections and they make more people get their brand awareness out of the festival. And it works, so everyone doesn't miss out on the masterclasses and everything like this, like we are now. So that I think is incredible. And festivals working quite well around doing the social distancing and the live screenings, obviously driving in the US is great. In the UK, it's like very empty cinemas with festival screenings. Hopefully that will soon change. But I don't think there's going to be a problem because festivals now are working around things very quickly and noticing how to work around the restrictions and about with COVID. The only thing that's brought up a big question for me, and I know that the other guys will be able to answer this, but I just wonder how long film markets will remain physical. Because do you actually need to go to a market physically? Because Marché de Film online was brilliant, and I'm sure deals got made. And Cameron Bailey talked about in an article about with TIFF that deals got made, word of mouth happened online and social media, didn't have to be in person. So obviously money must have been being made, I'm sure. But do we actually need a market that is physical? Can we do it all online for that part of the process? That's my kind of big question that's come up about how will markets carry on? How will they change and adapt? Can they go back to how they were and charge that expensive accreditation fees and really expensive, like hiring for sales agents to get furniture at Cannes or whatever? So I just wonder if that would change a lot. That's all my big thing that's come out of it over the pandemic.
So many great thoughts there. I happen to think the kind of narrative film that when this whole thing hit, I was thinking of the genre, I always call it hipsters in the woods. That's like a staple of South by Southwest, where you have these very small kind of bubbled productions. And I thought, okay, that's maybe one model forward. You can have those, if you have a small group of folks. So I'm wondering though, what advice are you giving your clients, Rebecca, Brian, and Mick, about navigating this period of uncertainty and basically launching a film right now? my heart goes out to our filmmakers that have had their festival run interrupted. Some, in case of JR from Marcus, literally in the middle of the Miami Film Festival, they shut down. He had one physical screening, didn't get to have a second one.
That was stressful. That was like, oh my God, that was something else. Well, I'll just talk about the bit in terms of film festivals. So what I'm advising clients is, one thing I am saying is, I get lots of people come to me and they always say, shall we just wait until after the pandemic to get into festivals? I'm like, no, like the time is now. They said, oh, surely by next year, by January, February, it'll be back to normal. I went, we don't know. You know, it's going to not be the back to normal that we're used to by being all like in a big crowd and having finger food and no worries about hygiene anytime soon. And laurels are important. So this one client of mine, she was very keen to do the Oscar run for her short film. So I said, look, we need to get into like all these key festivals that are running this fall and winter and next year, but not all of them will be physical. They're going to be hybrid or online, but the awards will still happen, just obviously on a virtual awards ceremony. So we need to keep, like, think as we are as normal, plan as normal, but just we'll have to adapt to how we're going to present the film and etc. And clients of mine who have features, I always said to them, please geo-block, so we don't worry too much about getting a sales agent, like I'm sure Brian Nick will know, just to be extra safe, that we don't overexpose it to the world, just to be on the safe side. So I'm saying to them, look, carry on as normal. And when it comes to the festival screenings, really start learning how to use Instagram in terms of stories and Instagram posts to really get your clientele to see the film, and also do as normal, email your colleagues, your peers, your friends, your family, and invite them to the screening, pay for the virtual ticket, and then do a Q&A to have a presence, and then maybe arrange a separate Zoom Q&A, like a meeting with the people who wanted to be there and have a talk about it and have a business meeting. So just really be flexible and adapt, because some filmmakers are very much like, no, it has to be physical screening. My film is theatrical, cannot be online. So well, let's just adapt and flexible. We'll have some of those soon next year, I'm sure. But right now, let's take advantage of this new model, which is really good platforms, you know, like Seed and Spark and Inventive. All these platforms are really good. They're not going to be cheap looking things. It's professional. So let's carry on as we are and just adapt when it comes to the exhibition.
Great. Brian, any thoughts on this? I know the Last Out, which we're showing in our virtual lineup, did have a screening at Rooftop Films Drive-In this summer. Yep. So you have been able to get a few of those films in physical screenings. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in that sense?
Yeah, so I mean, that movie won a special jury prize at Tribeca, and the only people who watched it were the jury. That's not an ideal situation for anyone. There are in-cinema potentials, but in March and April, my job was not to book films, it was to negotiate with events that were canceling and postponing, and refunding screening fees that had already been paid out for events that were no longer able to happen. That has become my job in the past 3 weeks again, with film festivals, especially in Europe, saying, we're going to go fully in person. And, you know, we have a movie that's screening at a huge documentary film festival in the Czech Republic in 2 weeks, not even. And they just shut down cinemas in Czech Republic. So what I am saying when I'm negotiating with the festivals and the events, at this point, this trauma has been going on for months. If you have not built out a plan B for your event and you are insisting on going in person, you still have to pay us the fee, because this is on you, not on us. And I highly encourage that you create a plan B at this point. This festival in Czech Republic, they were so far ahead, even as they were advocating for in cinema. They actually, in our agreement, had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And we had to sign off on it. And you know, that's what I want. And I'm telling our filmmakers to be less focused on premiere status. And this applies to most of the films we're working with. And I'm saying, you know, what COVID has shown is premiere status is really an abstract thing that the majority of the world doesn't give a damn about. And truthfully, since COVID hit, it's almost been a non-issue. Even with most European festivals, it has largely been a non-issue. But geo-blocking matters, collective strategy matters, and you have to, as a filmmaker, as a producer, be prepared for the risks of your actions. I can't tell you for certain that screening at this festival isn't going to prevent a deal with Amazon or Netflix, because they are changing their terms as they go. I can't say that it's going to prevent IFC or Magnolia, but what we can do is take preventative and protective action, right? Instituting caps for the festivals, instituting geo-blocking. And as bleak as this may sound, from over 400 film festivals since March, I've only had 3 where I instituted a cap where our film reached the cap. And that's regardless of if it was USA-wide or state-based. So I don't even personally care that much about the geo-block outside of the specific territory. But I do care how it's being marketed. And I think certain festivals like Outfest, where they truly marketed themselves nationwide, that is problematic. And I actually think what Slamdance and Sundance are doing is going to prove to be very problematic for everything in Slamdance and for the smaller films in Sundance that aren't coming with a distribution deal. Going to those 20 cities, are you prepared to have your festival run cease? And what happens if you go to Sundance and you don't leave with the deal? We need to have those conversations actively now, because their value isn't what it was last year.
Excellent points. And I want to thank you too for being very flexible with us and allowing us to show. And we're actually going to be talking to the filmmakers behind How to Overthrow the U.S. Government at 3 o'clock. So we're that one we absolutely love. I
also just like saying the title.
Yes. Illegally, you have to put the legally in quotes. Yes. I forgot that. Nick, any last words on, or any advice that you're giving your clients as they navigate this and finance, distribution, all the areas that you touch upon in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's simple, right? It's like in like the immortal words of like Peter Gabriel, don't give up. And also know that filmmaking is a collaborative art, and like, we're going to figure it out. Where everyone, it's amazing how much the business is changing. And I think at the end of the day, change is good, right? Change, you throw out all the old rules and you bring in new rules. And so as long as we can make sure that we are having a fine eye of, taking the knowledge of how independent films were successful in the past and utilizing the technology now that we have in better ways, I think there are plenty of old models that need to get thrown out the window. And so hopefully with a little bit of with which is a little bit of destruction, we can all sort of rebuild and have a better foundation. So just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, if you're doing the right thing, we'll find you, and we will help you. As simple as that. So head down, pencils up.
Amazing. All right. Are there, one quick lightning round one, are there any changes from this COVID era? If the world goes back tomorrow to normal, we get a vaccine, are there any adaptations that we think are positive that are going to continue in the business, or we think this was all hell, let's get back to what it was last year?
This Zoom chat is the answer to that question.
Yeah, I would hate to be in the commercial real estate business, because my business has completely changed, not having to go to the office from 9 to 7 Monday through Friday.
Right, we're all in, well, I'm assuming we're all in some version of a house right now. And let's be real. If you wanted us to speak at the Buffalo Film Festival last year, you would have to fly every single one of us to Buffalo. You would have to put us up in a hotel. So here's something that really does open up the whole industry. It's like, I'm here in Buffalo right now. Last weekend, I was in Australia judging a short film competition. And what I think that does globally is actually very positive, because it becomes a equalizer regardless of how much money or resources you have, especially for short filmmakers, where most festivals aren't going to pay for a short filmmaker to attend. Well, now they are getting potentially equal access to feature filmmakers. And I think that's truly wonderful. So I don't think you're going to see virtual go away. And I personally enjoy not being in an office.
Yeah, no, totally agree on those points, definitely. Just thinking now about the gift of Zoom, Brian, is tomorrow, thanks to Zoom, I'm going to be able to go to Berlin to do a masterclass in Berlin. And I can just stay in the same room as I am now. But it's like to the point I mentioned about the hybrid model. It's definitely here to stay for that online element, because all my clients want to go to certain festivals but can't afford to because of where it is. And they want to go to the industry section with their short. They're like, oh, what's going to save up? But now I'm saying to my clients, well, you can do a lot more than you could before, thanks to Zoom, thanks to all these other platforms, Google, Hangout, whatever it is. That's not as great as Zoom, though, by the way. It'll still be here to stay, and I really do think it'll be really, really good for all festivals and markets for the foreseeable future.
I hear that. I would have never been able to go to Cannes for, and it was only like $215 US to attend or something. It was very, very cheap to attend the market this year. So
you can even get lunch normally for that price.
in Cannes, yes. Although I did miss Toronto. I love going to Toronto every year. That was a bummer to have to do that from my couch. Although their app and their experience was very user friendly, and it was awesome. And then you have those other apps, the Sanando, the networking app for film professionals. So I guess it does kind of work out. But well, thank you so much for your generous comments and your insights to this. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I want to also thank you for all being great friends of the Buffalo International Film Festival and supporting us and the work that we do here. And we're happy to support your filmmakers as well. So thank you. Go Bills, Nick. Thanks.
Go Bills. See you later.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. It was great. Nice to
Thanks,
meet you.
Rebecca. Always nice to see you. Maybe next year at Tribeca. I think they're doing it in the summer this year.
Yes, absolutely. And also, first, one thing that online can't replace is networking. That's the best organic in-person networking, having a laugh like we did. Things like that. That will never online can't replace that. No way could it replace that, because that's something it can't do. But I can't wait to get back and actually just take someone's hand. It was so weird at CineQuest, and that was the last festival I went to was CineQuest this year, and that got cancelled halfway through. And it went from like handshake into this like thing like that.
That's what I'm saying for South by this year. Brian, you'll appreciate this. Rebecca took me to see St. Louis Superman at Tribeca.
Oh,
Now we have Sammy's next new film.
yeah, and we didn't get into it too much, but we had a whole strategy built around Major League Baseball and their summer season.
Sammy's a fan of the Blue Jays, so he's having a good time up in virtual Buffalo.
So it is this weird, strange thing that we all have to navigate. And I consider myself lucky that I got Berlin and Rotterdam before it all went to crapola. It is great to network in person. It is great to be together in person. But you can create, virtual hangouts. You can create rotating happy hours. You can do things so we meet people semi-organically.
Yeah, semi-organic, that's what it is. I've met people actually online during the whole COVID, pandemic thing and doing it all from home. And it has been quite good. I met some really good people. So yeah, so it does work. But those people have to be willing to talk. There was a Zoom breakout room once, and one person didn't like to talk. So we're like, why are you here? You have now the pressure to talk and tell us who you are. And
free wine would have helped. So that's what the festivals normally offer, right? Free wine, vodka, beer, whiskey, tequila, whatever the sponsors are. That motivates conversation. That motivates business. And I don't know how you do that in a virtual space without like legal liabilities, because you can't just ship your liquor sponsors. No. But that would be, the one way. Find a way that you can get us alcohol, so we can do this all while drinking, and it would just be a grand, different event. And say hi to all of the former students for How to Overthrow the U.S. Government Legally for me.
Will do.
I'm so stoked for it. Have a great day.
Thank you, Brian.
Great, thanks.
Thank you,
John.
Brilliant. Great to see you. Thanks. Bye.